The pressure to have your life all sorted out, especially as a young person, can often be completely overwhelming. I know for myself that I feel this constant pressure to have every aspect of my life perfectly sorted out. It's this sense of urgency to get to a place in my life where everything is just perfect, right? Where I no longer have to race everyone else to success. This place where I'm going to have the perfect job, the perfect family, the perfect friends, the perfect education and understanding of the world, the perfect skills and talents, the perfect health, the perfect everything. And I know I'm not alone in this pressure and feeling this pressure. I often talk with friends, family who feel the same way. It's true that everyone, regardless of their age, experiences this in their life to one degree or another. It's just part of being a human, it's part of the human experience. But it does seem to me that it's especially intense when we're young, and sometimes so intense that it can even send us into a kind of depression. Right? We feel like we have the weight of the entire world on our shoulders. So, why do we so often feel this way? And how should we deal with these struggles on a daily basis? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. My name's Finn Pope. Welcome back to another video. So, I think it's strange at first glance that many of us feel this way at such a young age because for many of us at this stage in life, we don't actually have all that much responsibility. Right? Most of us are either working or we're in school, or maybe we're working and in school. And I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that those things can't be very hard, that they aren't very hard, and that they're not very important. They are all of those things. But what I do want to point out is that most of us are solely responsible for ourselves at this stage in life. Right? We aren't married, we don't have kids. Our responsibilities primarily end with taking care of and providing for ourselves. Maybe you're the exception. Maybe you are very young and already married. I think that's fantastic. Maybe you already discerned into priesthood or religious life. That's amazing. But for most of us, that's not the case. And I think this can actually give us a lot of clarity and peace as we deal with this pressure in our day-to-day lives, because I believe that our sense of confusion and pressure to have our lives all sorted out, particularly at such a young age, at least in part, I think it's due to the fact that many of us just aren't settled in our vocations yet. Right? We're just not living out our vocations yet, whether that be marriage, priesthood, religious life. Our vocation is the deepest and most important way that God calls us to holiness and to serve Him in this life. So to me, it just kind of makes sense that we would be especially anxious about our lives before we've finished discerning and entered into our vocation. And the other aspect of this that I kind of alluded to earlier is simply the fact that because most of us are solely responsible for ourselves at this stage in life, we're going to have an extra strong tendency to think about and worry about ourselves. If much of our life consists of doing things to provide for and take care of ourselves, then naturally, much of our attention and energy is going to be spent thinking about ourselves and about our own lives. And I'm not saying that this is a bad thing in and of itself. It just makes sense given our state in life. But I do think it kind of helps to explain why many of us feel this way. And on the same note, we should be conscious of the fact that we're gonna need to be especially on guard against temptations to sin at this stage, since we're already sort of extra preoccupied with ourselves. I think a lot of us are going to experience temptation to a much stronger degree at this stage in our life. So we should be very aware of that fact. And I also don't want this to be discouraging, right? It doesn't mean that we can't do God's will in our lives before we've entered into our vocation. It's just going to look different. He's still calling us, though. He's still calling us to give our life away in love. He's still calling us to selflessness, to sainthood. So don't think that I'm suggesting, we lean into this tendency to be more self-centered at this stage. I'm just noting that we naturally will be more preoccupied with ourselves before we've entered into our vocation. And so we're going to probably be more worried about our lives, more anxious about things in our lives because we're more fixated on them. So, while we shouldn't stress out over this reality, we shouldn't allow this to be another thing that's causing worry and anxiety in our lives. We should just be conscious of it and actually allow it to give us some peace, because we can rest in knowing that it's not always going to be like this. I think of Think of like any time you talk to your parents or a mentor or someone much older than you about how you feel all these pressures and to have your life all sorted out. What do they almost always say? It's almost always something to the effect of, "Don't worry, it won't always be like this. Just keep going. It gets easier. A lot of these things, you won't even be worried about a year from now." And we can kind of easily dismiss this because we've heard it a million times, but it's actually true. It's just true because for many of us who aren't in our vocation yet, then of course we're going to have a lot of anxieties, a lot of worries about our lives, the direction of our lives, where we're going with things. Of course we're going to have those, especially before we've entered into our vocation. And a lot of those things won't be concerns once we've entered into our vocation. And all of this also reminds us that we're not left to ourselves to figure out our lives. Rather, we have a loving Father who knows the true desires of our hearts infinitely more than we do. He will guide us into the life that He has planned for us. He will. All we have to do is say yes to Him each day. All we have to do is surrender each day in the biggest things and in the smallest things. Christ tells us in Matthew 6, verses 25 through 27, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you shall drink, nor about your body, what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add 1 cubit to his span of life?" I often wonder how many hours I've shaved off my life stressing out about things that I can't control, or worrying about things that, like, a few months later, I literally can't remember. I'll give a quick story here. It was recently, maybe a month and a half ago, there was uh, something I needed to address with a close friend of mine, a conversation I needed to have, and it was causing me a lot of stress. I was really nervous about talking to this person, having this conversation, and for several weeks, I'm like working it up in my head and thinking about exactly what I'm going to say. Of course, I'm thinking about all the ways it could just go completely wrong, and just I'm gonna bring this up, and the conversation is just gonna explode. And I'm stressing out so much about it. It literally got to the point where I'm even starting to resent this person a little bit, thinking like, why is this even happening? Like I shouldn't even have to bring this up. I shouldn't even have to have this conversation. All these different things just working me up, taking up so much of my energy and my mental space. Finally, I talked to this person, and as soon as I talked to them, pretty much everything I had worked up in my head surrounding this just fell away. It was a wonderful conversation. There was no real confrontation. It was totally fine. And basically everything I convinced myself of and had been brewing on for days and days, it just turned out to be completely false. It's kind of humiliating looking back on it now, because it just ended up being such a small thing that I had worked up to this huge deal in my head. And that's not to say that there aren't legitimately things like that come up in our lives that can go catastrophically wrong and like be horrible. I'm not saying that, but a lot of the times it's, I think, similar to this story that I've just given. It's much more, we get overly worried, overly anxious about things. That's kind of what Christ is telling us about here. So then in verses 33 and 34, he says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things shall be yours as well. Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Let the day's own trouble be sufficient for the day." So in all of your anxieties and all of your worries about life, regardless of your stage in life, but particularly at this early stage in a lot of our lives, we need to remember that God is with us. God is with you in all of it. He knows the answer to every single thing, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. He knows the answer to everything that's bothering you right now. So turn to Him. Have peace in the fact of your own weakness and neediness, and in the fact of God's mercy and love for you. Have peace in that. And remember that God's power is made perfect in weakness. Please be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment down below. Yeah, comment down below if you're someone who has worries and anxieties in their life. Be sure to leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next time. God bless.